So before we get to the big discussion of the week, Dave, what do you recommend from Osiris Media?
So there's a podcast that we have not discussed on the drop before. It's very interesting. It's called The Tapes Archive. And what it is, it's archival releases, it's unreleased interviews with musicians throughout the years. This is a lot of stuff from the 70s, 80s, 90s, just like surprisingly unreleased stuff that was buried. I don't know exactly the guy behind it where he gets these things or what archives he's looking for, but there was a really fascinating interview with Neil Peart from Rush from 1994, which I enjoy listening to. But the most recent addition to the Tapes Archive is an interview with Brad Delp, who was recently deceased, who's the lead singer of Boston. And the interview takes place in 1978. It's funny, Boston is on the cusp of releasing their second album, which, from the sounds of the interview, has been constantly delayed and delayed and delayed. I think their first record came out in 1976, and being the late 70s, you could have almost expected them to chase it with something in 77. But here we are in 78, and the second record's not out yet. And it's funny because, like, Brad Delp is almost like apologizing. He's saying, like, hey, we haven't done the vocals. As far as I know, it's hanging out in Tom Scholz's basement. Tom Scholz, of course, being the super perfectionist guitarist, somewhat anal retentive leader of Boston. One of those bands that the lead singer is not really the front man so much as he is a guy with a really like pretty voice and a really big curly do, as Brad Delp had. But no, I mean, it's pretty quick. It was only 26 minutes and just kind of like an interesting snapshot of a band gearing up to put out their second album, and just how hilarious it is that like 2 years is considered an eternity for a new release in the late 70s. So yeah, check out the interview. And really, I think there's probably at least like 50, 60 Tapes Archives episodes at this point, and each of them are fascinating in their own way. So check it out.
Yeah, absolutely love that podcast. And there's always like insights and moments where like I hear interviews with artists from the past where I'm like, man, I just learned something completely new. I can't believe that we have that content. It's really, really cool. I'm going to recommend a show that the trailer was just released for, but the show should be out here at least, I believe, the week that this comes out. That is Lit's My Own Worst Enemy. It's a upcoming podcast here from Osiris Media, produced by the phenomenal Brad Stratton. I was on a couple initial calls for the show and I've heard, I think, 2 of these episodes thus far. Really fantastic and just fascinating deep dive into one of the most contagious pop hits of the last 30 years. A song that was everywhere for the summer of 1999 and has been everywhere again in a variety of ways, be it in movie soundtracks, video games, guitar band, karaoke machines, jukeboxes in dive bars, sporting events, name it. This song has been everywhere over the last 30 years. It's one of those songs that like you hear the opening riff and you just know exactly what it is the minute it comes on. Brad did a number of really fascinating and fantastic interviews with the members of Lit, talking about they were a band for about 15 years before this song came out, and were just kind of like living off of.
I had no idea.
I didn't either before
Really?
this started. Yeah, they formed in the
Whoa.
mid 80s. They were just kind of like a band in Orange County, playing shitty clubs, not making a ton of money, figuring out ways to survive off of, Doritos and water, and, driving with just like enough gas in the tank to get to the studio, and then hoping that they could push their car back to the gas station. I mean, just like roughing it, living as like close to the poverty line as possible while following this dream to be rock stars. And suddenly it happened, all based off of this one song. And so it's kind of that. That's it. So it's a really interesting dive into the power of a single song while also showcasing like what it takes for a band to strike that gold and like have that moment where like, oh my God, everybody wants to hear our song, but then also what happens after that. And Lit has a new record coming out, and so there's a lot of conversation around like the band's evolution in the 20 plus years since the song came out. Just a really fascinating dive into the power of a song and what it means for a band's arc, regardless where they go. Kind of brings up the idea of like, I guess one hit wonders in terms of what that actually means from the band's perspective, which is always a really fascinating subject in rock music. But incredibly well produced, great interviews, great perspective on pop music, on punk music in the late 1990s, and I just cannot recommend it enough to our listeners. So, highly recommend everyone check out the Tapes Archive as well as Lit's My Own Worst Enemy.